So the question is a subject of faith, and so I intend to explore that. First of all, what do we mean by faith? And then secondly, what's the benefit of it? What's the use of it? And thirdly, how would we develop it? So the word faith is a peculiar word because these days, in English anyway, the word faith and the word religion, believer, these seem to be synonymous terms. That's not what we mean by faith. What we mean by faith is really equivalent to trust. And trust also has many different levels and layers of it. So we know that the one extreme of faith or trust will be blind faith. And you might say, or ask a question, do children have blind faith? And I suppose they do, but blind faith as a term we're applying to adulthood. Because as children, we're expected to be reliant and dependent on others. That's fine. And there's something very sweet and very innocent about the kind of faith which we find from a child. A baby doesn't question, is it good to be carried around? A baby knows, has faith that milk will be supplied. There's a built-in kind of way of behaving, what we might call instinct. But as we know, instinct is not something that arrives all of a sudden, nor does it seem to come in its entirety in a genetic way. But according to our way of thinking, all of our behavior comes from a previous experience, learned experience. And if you want to be biologically accurate about it, then you'd have to go back to the first kind of single-celled organisms that learned to survive, learned to thrive, learned to defend themselves in very primitive conditions, and learned to make a cooperative family. And then we find multicellular organisms until we find the very complex thing which we see as humans, with a very complex neurological system. Now, as we develop from childhood, we come across what we call life. And life, we can consider, may have what seems to be challenges, obstacles, problems, and so on. And so the opposite of faith then comes out as self-doubt. And so we have to develop faith in three things according to our Vedanta system. That is, we will develop faith in ourselves primarily. When we read the Bhagavad Gita, we see that is the theme from the very start. This fearfulness, this cowardice doesn't behove you. It's not worthy of you. Now, in the Upanishads, we have a great example of faith. The Katha Upanishad is there. It begins with a story, Nachiketa. Let us say an 11, 12-year-old boy that sees from a truthful perspective that his father is not offering everything possible for a ceremony. He is bypassing it, trying to get away with something. And one of the distributions of gifts would be cows. And the father takes the leanest and, hobbling kind of cows we can imagine. And Nachiketa asks, well, you want to offer the best. Well, to whom will you offer me? And of course, we know from there, it is, to death I'll offer you. And then, without seeming to blink, he says, okay, fine. And then he waits for 3 days. He's a Brahmana, so he's waiting for Yam, the Lord of Death, who's a Kshatriya, and naturally he has to apologize. I've kept Brahmana waiting for 3 days, and so what can I do? I'll give you some wishes. Now, throughout the whole conversation, we see this tremendous faith at such a small age. First of all, the faith that the teacher, who the best teacher can be, death is the best teacher, will get something meaningful from it, and that will answer the most fundamental questions of life, ultimately. The most fundamental question of life is the hardest question. Hardest question would be to do with death itself. Is there such a thing as immortality? So we have to have faith in ourselves. Nachiketa shows the way in this. We have to have faith in the teacher. Nachiketa shows this. We have to have faith in the scripture. The story comes out as it. And we have to have faith in that supreme being that religion calls God. And what is the benefit of such faith? Well, the opposite of that would be fear. And as you know, fear is not such a pleasant thing. If we have faith in something, then naturally all our fear goes away. Again, we're using the various other alternative terms. Trust. There are some things that we inherently trust from our experience. Some obvious things. We trust that when we put food in the mouth, it will be digested. We trust that the heart will pump and beat, not just this second, but all subsequent seconds. We have faith that the sun will shine. Sometimes in Ireland, that faith might dwindle a little bit, but no, we know even behind the clouds, it is all there. We have faith that at some point or other, the eyes will open in the morning. We have faith in the natural order of things, and we have faith in all the laws, and this carries through to science, because science has faith in immutable laws, illogically. Because when you ask, how did these laws develop? Where did they come from? Don't ask that question. It is there. Laws are there. So there are certain things that when we examine it carefully, we have faith in. And we don't have any fear that anything other than that will happen. For example, we don't have fear that there will be a permanent eclipse and there will be absolutely no sunlight. We don't have to have fear that everything we put in our mouth would be rejected and we vomit it up. We have faith that when we get up in the morning, we can walk at least. So there are some things that our experience says are trustworthy. So what is the opposite? What is fear? And I've given this definition a number of times. You can say fear is putting faith in heredity, giving it authority over us. What do I mean by that? As long as we feel we are an embodied entity, as long as we feel that we are an individual trying to, as best we can, struggle through life, then there will always be fear. And fear comes down to the basic fear, the basic biological fear that all animals have. The whole behavior in animals other than humans is to do with protecting themselves, to do with avoiding fearful situations, always looking. If you look in Africa, the deer don't regard themselves as safe. Any animal will look at you sideways, and the only way to establish a trust with that animal, you put your hand out a little bit, look away from it, let it sniff you, lick you a little bit, and then you can stroke the air and make friends with it. So there's one lesson in life: always approach something from the side first. You remove the threatening environment. Now, this fearfulness to do with survival is not really just in non-human species. We find it in human species as well, and that would be the basis for all our wars. We suspect that something may happen. There's a word for that translated, potentially puts 5 kinds of waves in the mind. One of them is verbal delusion. What does it mean? We imagine something. And some subcomponents of that may be gossiping, rumor mongering. And that is the most devastating thing to us. There's something like an Aesop's fable. A man in the market hears a rumor about a certain woman, and then he repeats that rumor. Have you heard? Eventually, the whole village knows this, and the woman gets humiliated and leaves. Then this person who starts this whole thing off discovers that it's not true. Then he looks, how can I reconcile, bring her back to the village and restore her reputation? And as a wise woman of the village, he goes there. What will I do? She says, go and find a chicken, pluck as many feathers as you can from the chicken, and go to the village that you suspect she's living in, and drop all the feathers on the pathway. Once you've reached the border of the village, yeah, he thought this is crazy. Anyway, this woman has a reputation for wisdom. And then she says, as you trace yourself back, collect all the feathers and bring them to me. So he does it. And as he turns around, he realizes, oh, all the feathers are gone. They've been blown away by the wind. Not even one left. And the wise woman says, you see, the lesson is like this. When you start a rumor, there's no going back. That's how destructive it is. So verbal delusion is where our imagination takes place. What if? What if? And you recognize this language in connection with fear. And that develops in a kind of paranoia where there's no trust in life or nature itself. Many questions arise. What if this happens? What if that happens? To do with the future. But one thing's for sure, the future never arrived. And you can't rely on past things to assess whether something is reliable or not. Past is gone. So when you ask a why question, it's a useless question, it's to do with the past, it's gone. Well, much better to say, what next? And do some action. Put something useful into the next second. A blank check, never been used before. Go and put something useful in it. And that means then that if you have faith in the capacity of thought as a divine grace bestowed on you every second by second by second, that means that you're mapping out and developing the future for yourself. And that means there's no fatalism in our system, in our psychology. And there's the old story, of course. An astrologer comes to a king and puts out the astrological chart. And in the presence of the prime minister, he says, unfortunately, this king, who's a healthy man, he has 6 months to live. And the prime minister knows this is untenable. And the king is healthy. He's in the peak of health. All the court physicians will attest to it. What can possibly happen in 6 months? Then he asks, the prime minister asks the astrologer, how long do you think you'll live? He says, 22 years. And with that, the prime minister cuts the astrologer's head off. See what became of that. If you think that life is all fixed in front, then you can test. There's a teacher who tested a student on that. Please repeat after me. What is that? He gives some mathematical formulas. He quotes some poetry. Please just repeat everything after me. Then after a while, he said, why are you doing that? Oh, you told me to do it. All right, okay. So you don't have any destiny, nothing is predestined, or you don't even have any character of your own. You felt obliged to follow me. You can have faith in yourself, have faith in your own thought, and ask, why are you asking me to do this? Find out first. So that means reasoning comes into it. Now there is some exercise that we do. It's called timeline therapy. What does that mean? Somebody comes to you and says, I have a phobia, or I have a fear. All right, please sit down, relax, take a deep breath in, throw the breath out through the open mouth, relax the entire body, adopt a let go attitude. Even that may require some trust. Now imagine that there is an invisible line going across your head. You can choose either it's going from left to right or from the back to the front. And if it's from the back to the front, the back is the past. And if it's from left to right, the left is the past, right is the future. Front to back, front is the future. Now, I want you to imagine events going back, let's say 4 years of age. Did you have this fear at that point? Oh yes, this happened, okay. And then when you went to school, what happened? Well, I developed a fear there, fear of people, other people, social company, because I was humiliated or something. And the teacher discipline me. Okay. And then at the age of 12, and then you'll see various fears developing. And then you say, okay, at that point of 4, was there any reason why these children behaved in this way? Is there any reason why this teacher behaved in this way? Is there any reason why these parents behaved in this way? If you were the parents, what would you have done? In other words, from an adult point of view, you're reviewing these fears that come out from childhood. And by doing that and by inserting a rationale about it, imagine the fear disappears, it goes away. So we have to rationalize an irrational emotion such as fear and ask ourselves, is there really any reason for it? So we have to train ourselves to do something. What is it? Well, unless you can recognize the divine principle, let's call it God if you want, in the person or the article that frightens you, you'll not be free from fear. And where that recognition comes from is a faith in reasoning philosophy. Why do we have all these talks and what have you? Well, we are presenting to you the principles of the Vedanta and the logic of it. That alone is not adequate, because the more important thing is your practice has to catch up with it. Emotions, in other words, have to catch up with the intellect. The heart has to reconcile with the head. That's the difficult thing. So there has to be faith in the heart, in the very depth of your being. And if it's not there, we have to develop it. Firstly, by examining, is there any grounds for it? And we have to train ourselves, therefore, to see this divine when temptation and fear come. And by doing this, you'll get rid of it. But we have to be convinced. Standing in front of us is God dressed up. Standing in front of us means the entire environment, what we call nature, comprising people, places, events, everything the eye see, everything the ears hear, everything the skin touches. We have to re-register to God's account. We have to revalue everything from our limited individual fearful perspective and revalue it to that same divine that carries us like a divine helmsman taking us across the ocean in his boat. Lord, you are the divine helmsman. Please carry me. Let me sit on your shoulders. There is a kind of image like that. There's an image associated with the life of Krishna, when Krishna gets relocated, as it were, and his father carries him on shoulders across in a flood, across the rivers and so on and so forth. Eventually he gets to the place of his upbringing, away from the danger of persecution by the king. All right. We have the same kind of image in Christianity of Saint Christopher carrying the Lord on his back. He doesn't know it's the Lord. He's carrying this, the story goes, across a river, and the child is getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And he gets the revelation, oh Lord, it is you. It's my privilege to carry you. It's my privilege to assist you. It's my privilege to serve you, because underneath it all and under all the layers, only you exist. That's all that is there. And what reinforces it is repetition of the Lord's name, lovingly called japa, worship. All of those things reinforce it. Regular practice reinforces it. I recently had a conversation with a devotee from the UK, and they were saying, you see, when I don't practice my spiritual practice, even if it's for 5 minutes in the morning, my whole day goes badly. I know what the problem is when my day goes badly. I didn't charge my spiritual battery in the morning. So we have to train ourselves to see this divinity in every event, in every circumstance, and have a penetrating vision to go beyond the material, the energetic, and so on, and there we find the Lord. The Taittiriya Upanishad will give us these various layers, and these are various sheaths. So these are called kosha, or sheaths. The first one, of course, is just made from food. It is made from yesterday's potatoes and so on. That's today's body. And then behind that is an energetic thing, which has no borders. It's just localized. And actually, the two things are connected. Because without the food, you don't get the energy. And without energy, you can't digest the food. It's a circular thing. And then beyond that subtle border, the energizing border, energy, what do we find? Mind. And we have to understand what the Sankhya's mean by mind. You see, everything we experience through the instruments, eyes, ears, etc. And that gets reported. Information processing takes place. It gets reported to the internal organs in the brain. And these internal organs actually report to the bulk of what we call the mind. Officially we call it manasa. And therein you can find everything except one discerning factor called this buddhi, or this intellect. And that is the executive officer, so to speak, but it gets its light from what is called Purusha. The yogic philosophy is completely based on the Sankhya ideas of psychology. And then a feedback takes place. The executive officer, as it was, Purusha, it simply means self, combination of two Sanskrit roots, Puri and Purna, Puriya city. Unless you think there's a confinement in it, then Purna is fullness. The combination is Puri. Purusha, I should say. So Purusha is there, person is there, that then gives the direction back again. Afferent and efferent currents. That's how we work. But you see, we don't think of things like that. We think, I am doing it. But there's no such thing. So in front of us, the fragments of life, the difficulties and obstacles that are encountered in daily life, they're not mistakes. They're fragments. And other fragments will be there tomorrow as well. See, you're only recognizing the reaction to fear and fighting off the fragments. You're not changing the fragments. They will always beat you. So don't fight them. Don't reject them. They're not a danger. You put in positive thoughts instead. At the same time, you're tuning in to the totality, which we call Brahman, which we call the Supreme. So we have to use that antidote whenever we see some fearful thing come up, some doubtful thing come up, some tempting thing come up. We have to say, come if you like, stay if you can. I'm not rejecting you. Go if you must. But now I have to put in some positive things. And the most positive thing we can put in is the recognition of the divine in front of us. So whatever range we tune into or see, such as worry, fear, anxiety, those things get supplied to us. The current we don't tune into is also standing there. That current is the divine current called divine thought. And so therefore, why don't you program yourself to do and think in a positive way? Engage something positive. And then, if there are these painful scenes that plague you, well, there is a remedy. We can sit, we can reenact the painful scenes. We can use it even in meditation. Then open your eyes and remind yourself that you are in the present age, not the past, not the future. Then reenact the scene again, see how it looks. And after that, turn around and have a good laugh at it. Because it's not there with you. The present moment is the present moment. And it's occupied only by the divine Lord of the universe, Mother of the universe, the divine, whatever you wish to call that, the intimate presence. Practicing the presence of the divine is what you should be doing. And so in this way, all your fears and other negative emotions will get conquered. Try to find an excuse or an explanation for it. Try to rationalize it, as in the timeline therapy. Give thanks for the problem being there. Say, you were there, I climbed over you, so I'm no longer afraid. Instead of complaining, instead of harboring over it, I am fully equipped. If there are, as I say, thorns on a road, put tough shoes on and overcome it. We have the capacity to do that with a certain lightness, a certain sense of humor about it. If you have potholes in the road, I have long experience of that in Africa, potholes in the road, you take a four-wheel drive, you get round it. There is nothing in this life that we cannot get round. We're equipped to get round it, to climb over it. So after reaching the point of saying, the kingdom of heaven is here where I stand, then you can say, what is there that I have to run away from, retreat from, or be fearful from? So it's actually unnecessary to retreat from it. Attack the first suggestion of fear instead. Lord, lead the way. I'll be one with you. I will not surrender to the negative forces. So this involves strength. And so faith and strength are eternal companions. They are two dimensions of the same thing. That is why when we say, repeat some positive words, because we're always in dialogue with ourselves, strong, true, wise, full, free, truth, beauty, goodness, love, harmony, put that in. You see, we start off with strength. Swami Vivekananda said, I teach only the Upanishads, and of that I teach one principle, strength. Magnify the vision of glory. Magnify the vision of light and the august omnipresent power which you have inside you. That's what we call strength. And that is what we call faith in yourself. Faith in yourself is faith in the strength that is within you, that inside you deeply is the august omnipresent power, the Lord of the universe, sitting there, the divine, the omnipresent, the omnipotent, sitting there in all its glory. If you take that Kathopanishad, the useful passage, comparing this body, this mind-body unit to an 11-gated city. The Gita says 9 gates. Kathopanishad tells us 11 gates. 7 in the head, and then evacuation, procreation, and then the navel where life begins, and the royal entrance at the top of the head, Brahmarudra. So, to overcome fear, we should put thoughts of divine grace that is always flowing. We have to catch it. We have to feel it. All energy is divine grace flowing. All thought is divine grace flowing. We can say in the cert, you are the infallible. Show your glory everywhere. Keep repeating this. And when you do that, things will change. Fear will be made manifest. That which you fear, that's going to materialize. And strength, faith, thoughts of truth and goodness and beauty and love, those will be your future. You are mapping your future out with every single thought. This is the inevitable law, causal law. What do you call karma? It's not something about fatalism. Oh, your bad karma, your good karma. None of that. No fatalism in this. Every thought that you sow in, that you insert, that you plant, develops. So don't react negatively by ignoring or fighting it. Acknowledge it as a shadow. Yes, come if you like. Let it be. Come if you like. Stay if you can. Stay for a cup of tea. Go if you must. You are old friends I recognize from my childhood. And I won't entertain you for long, because once you've had your tea, you can go off. But new friends I have, mature friends, friends that are developed, friends that come from the foundation of faith. And that is this divine within me and within you and with everything. So you can look at fear as a kind of shadow, acknowledge it as a shadow, only as a shadow. Don't try to avoid looking at it. Let it be. And the word shadow is psychological speech for something that is repressed. We don't repress it. Don't deny it. Don't push or pull or try to push it out. Just adjust your attitude. Adjust your attitude toward the shadow and say, God remains God. Fullness remains fullness. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamiva Vashishyate. This is full and that is full. You can't add to fullness, you can't take away from fullness. So fullness is fullness. You see my old example, positive thinking, glass half full, half empty, both are negative. What we say is the glass is always full, it's always overflowing. So this comes then with grace. Faith comes accompanied by grace. Grace makes us get what we want. It's not we who are working and making through rituals and so on, because grace comes first and then action comes. So we have to understand the mechanism of everything. As soon as we lack faith, we have to stop and take stock. We have to make use of the scriptural principles that give us the rationale for it. Then we have to assess the opposite, how we are damaging through counter thoughts. Then we have to feel by tuning in our attention to the full glory of the divine, filling up all the time. You know, if you go in a vehicle and you start running out of fuel, then it'll come to a standstill. Any sensible driver will make sure that the vehicle is always filled with fuel to make the car run. So what is our fuel that makes our car run smoothly? It is this faith. Faith primarily in our own divinity, faith in the divinity of a teacher, faith in the divinity of God, faith in the divinity of the entire world. So we have faith in nature itself, because nature is not separate from this divinity. What we call God is nature. See, we have to carefully train the mind. Now, one thing about the training, really, I was reading recently, because we're going on a retreat in Glendalough soon. Actually, we're going on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So there's a man who established a center there and gave all information about Glendalough. And those people are not from Ireland, those people who have never heard of Glendalough, which means 2 lakes, will be mystified about this information. So I will give some background. There was a great saint called Saint Kevin that essentially established a monastery city by 2 lakes, but didn't start like that. So we know that ascetics of his type, which were anchorites, that means people living by themselves in, let's say, a cell or a cave. And in the more ancient times, ancient means, 4th, 5th centuries, 400s, 500s, 5th and 6th centuries, like that. And we know that there were beehive huts made from stone. And so no doubt you go to an isolated place and you construct something. And he also maybe had a cave that he lived in. In any event, he would stand for hours in the freezing cold water praying. He had a reputation for being the recipient of animals like birds settling on his shoulder and so on. And we know one of the disciplines was to stand in a cross position. That means you stand straight with your arms outstretched and you pray. And you spend hours like this. And every religion have examples of these ascetics. For example, in Buddha's life, you'll see extreme asceticism taking place there. And what is the result of these ascetic practices? Strength of will. Strength of will has also, and will is a key component of the mind, is the will in the mind. That means self-control also. But even self-control has no value if there's no access to inner wisdom. If they're simply developing what we call siddhis or powers, then there's no real intrinsic value. And we see that from some illustrations. The great mystic Sri Ramakrishna says, gives us two examples of a yogi, two brothers. One yogi spent hours and hours in meditation and so on, and this kind of ascetic discipline. And his brother comes along and says, he's a household, married, and so on and so forth, says, my brother, what have you been doing all these years? Oh, watch. See that elephant? Elephant die. Now elephant live. What did you see, brother? Well, he saw an elephant die and an elephant live. Is that what you've been practicing? Let me give you another example. So again, two brothers. See, here's a great river. Watch. Om, om, om. He walks across the water. It's one of the classical 8 siddhis. And the brother just takes the boat and goes across for a small amount of money. So you spend your whole life, what happened? Both of us crossed the water. I did it by boat, you did it by this peculiar means. Is that really worthwhile? The answer, of course, is no. So there has to be some kind of balance. Now, Bhagavad Gita puts it beautifully. And if we want to make progress, well, how do we make progress? Now, the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is all about meditation. And meditation is a key thing. Meditation gives us direct access to our inner divinity without all the distractions. And you may say, but when I sit for meditation, I get hundreds of distractions. But if you're registering everything to the divine, there are no distractions, because whatever comes up in the mind is an effect. It leads us all to ultimately the divine. If you take up Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, the textbook really on meditation, you say that certain regulations, he says, certain regulations as to food are necessary. But even before that, he lays out something important. He says, I will tell you a little of the Sankhya philosophy upon which the whole of meditation, he calls it Raja Yoga, is based. According to the Sankhya philosophy, the genesis of perception is as follows, is exactly what I described. That is, that the affections of external objects are carried by the outer instruments to their receptive brain centers or organs. The organs carry the affections to the mind to the determinative faculty, and from this the Purusha of the soul receives them when perception results. Next, he gives the order back, as it were, to the motor centers to do the needful. With the exception of the Purusha, all of these are material. Mind is material. There's a dispute. Is the mind the brain? And we don't enter into that because mind is subtle matter from our point of view. And so it is all material, just a degree of subtlety, that's all. And he says the mind is much finer matter than the external instruments. That material of which the mind is composed, very important point now, goes also to form the subtle matter called the tanmatras. Now you'll see more or less every talk I give, well, maybe with some exceptions, I make a point of mentioning these tanmatras. Because when we say, let us combat all our fears, all our doubts, lack of faith and trust and so on, by introducing thought, we also have to recognize that thought has a mobilizing action. Thought actually is made from the same material as these subtle forces, divine angels, if you like, that rearrange themselves and eventually condense, as it were, into our gross material world. So we have to handle it well. And by assembling noble thoughts and elevating the mind at every given moment, not just when we're in trouble, but to preempt everything by taking advantage when the mind is not occupied with anything in particular. Brushing the teeth, walking. When sundry thoughts are allowed to flow in, don't allow that. First of all, acknowledge what's happening, and then see whether these thoughts are useful to you or not. What do we mean by useful? If there's any element of egocentricity, these will predictably arrange the tanmatras and give us a result which intrinsically will be painful to us. That's the whole, really, of the Sankhya yogic kind of understanding. We want to avoid the pain. Even the Bhagavad Gita defines yoga as the avoidance of pain. The avoidance of the pain that is to come. So, in fact, it's called a V-yoga, if you will. All right. So we have to learn to mobilize these tanmatras in a positive, useful way. So anyway, that material of which the mind is composed goes also to form the subtle matter called the tanmatras. These become gross and make the external matter. That's the psychology of the Sankhya. So that between the intellect and the grosser matter outside, there is only a difference in degree. And the Purusha, the divine element in you, is the only thing which is immaterial. The mind is just an instrument, as it were, in the hands of the soul, through which the soul catches external objects. So, it says the reflexive power is what the yogi wants to attain. By concentrating the powers of the mind and turning them inward, he seeks to know what is happening inside. There is in this no question of mere belief. It is the analysis arrived at by certain philosophers, and modern physiologists tell us that the eyes are not the organ of vision, but that the organ is in one of the nerve centers of the brain. And so with all the senses, they also tell us that these centers are formed of the same material as the brain itself. And the Sankhya's also tell us the same thing. Now, he goes on, certain regulations, he says, as to food are necessary. And in this, he's quoting this Bhagavad Gita, 6th chapter, which tells us about how we can cultivate the criteria for progress. Now we want, let's say, some success in this art of concentration. So, natas tu yogosti, nachai kantam anastantata. Success in yoga or concentration is not for him who eats too much or for him who eats too little. Now, what constitutes too much? What constitutes too little? So we have to learn in these modern times to make sure not only that we have pure food, sattvic food, but also we have to watch what is the quantity. And that means we have to be aware, and we have to be aware in a divine-minded way. What does that mean? It means that the food is supplied by a whole series of divine events, because it requires rainfall, it requires growth, it requires transport, it requires packaging, it requires human resources to do all of these kinds of things. It requires nature's input of a seed that grows into a crop, let's say wheat, and it requires rainfall, as I said, it requires sunshine, it requires wind as well. All of these things it requires, and it requires the internal intelligence of the plant itself. All of this is a divine arrangement. We take it for granted. You just go to a supermarket and get something. No, it's more complicated than that. And then to accept it and say, this is a divine offering. That is why when we eat the food, we repeat from the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And you know it from all your centers. You say Om Brahmapanam, Brahmahavi, Brahmagno, Brahmanahutam. In other words, it's treating this as an offering, like a fire, like a divine Havan. The digestive fire being there, we're offering it with a hand, just as sure as if you were saying Swaha. So you're offering it nicely. You're offering it into the Lord because it's the Lord who's digesting it. The Bhagavad Gita calls it Vaishvanara. I digest the 4 kinds of food, says Krishna. So 4 kinds of food, I'm digesting it. Well, we have to at least be thankful for it, not just have faith in it. And by that kind of offering, we know that food will be digested well, that the Lord will take care of everything and transform and transport all the nutrients and transfer them into energetic cells, feeding the cells, and taking off all the deleterious material that gets off through the mucous lining and the air, through the lungs and so on. All of this with the kind of goods train, taking away all the waste products and transforming all the goodness into nutrition, making nutrition for every single cell of the body. So when we eat too much, why would we eat too much? Maybe because we have the psychological condition that says, I need a reward, I need compensation. Another way of saying, I have fear, I have anxiety. I have unfulfilled desires. A state of the mind which is in turmoil. So we have to be careful and regulate and treat all the food as divine resource, divinely supplied, and divinely taken and sorted out and used. And then for him who is moderate in eating and in recreation, temperate in his efforts, in actions, regulated in sleep and wakefulness. No insomnia here. Because no fear, no anxiety, no worry. Yoga, that is, this practice, becomes the destroyer of misery. I think we all want to destroy misery, isn't it? This yogo bhavati dukkhaha, destroyer of misery, destroyer of pain. And when this mind is completely controlled and rests or alights on this internal self that we can call Atman or Purusha, alone, free from desire for objects, then is one said to be established in this concentration. And the whole of our spiritual practice is concentration. And concentration requires taking into account the divine gift of time every second, every minute, making it well organized, not wasting anything, making sure that things are planned and scheduled so that everything is concentrated, doing things with a sense of mindfulness, a sense of devotion, a sense of practicing the presence of the divine, living in the present moment, not worrying about the next second or the next day, or not commiserating over, I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that, but living in this present moment, tuning everything into this present moment, and having faith in the exact presence of the divinity in all its fullness, here and now. And I draw your attention back to Joel Goldsmith, his book, The Art of Meditation. He makes a definition for it. It is a song of gratitude. That divine, it's called God, that God is here, God is now, God is love. It's worth repeating the phrase. Well, I think if there's nothing else, we'll leave it there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Swamiji. In the next class, can you please explain what is free will? You were talking about free will.
Yes,
yes.
Yes,
definitely.
All right.
Free will. How it is free will is where it starts from, what it is. I couldn't get the entire thing of free will.
So yes. All good, all good. I might just preempt it a little bit with a small commentary. You
Okay.
see, these two words, freedom and will, are contradictory. Because will, and you'll understand it if you substitute the word will for want. Supposing you say, I want to move this chair from here to there, then there has to be a chair in advance of it. So there's no freedom in that because it's all conditional.
Okay.
Ah.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
So the real freedom is actually belongs to this Atman.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Mm.
And then when we say, so when we really talk about as fundamentals, consciousness and free will, we're not talking about our, well, in a sense, we're talking about our level, our experience of free will. We experience free will, even though we may not technically have it. We have free choices, no doubt.
Mm.
But it is really a reflection of the divine will. And that means that the cosmic mind, which is the creative divinity, that you see, the Rig Veda tells us that the first thing that comes from Brahma will be Vag Devi. That comes to us in modern times as Saraswati.
Mm.
So Brahma doesn't do any creation except for the energy that is projected. And what makes the projection is a will.
Mm.
I will to do this. So every religion that says according to God's will, of course they're accurate. But I don't know if they know the full implication of it. So it is by this divine will that things are moving and things are operating. There's a section in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It's a dialogue there. It's called the Yajnavalkya section.
Mm.
And you see there, the question is, what is, and those people who think that people believed in a flat earth or something like that, or had some peculiar non-scientific idea of the earth, we will find that it's not accurate just from these kinds of statements. So anyway, Yajnavalkya is being asked some questions. There's a background to the story. I won't go into that. Just briefly to say that assembly of wise people are there in King Janaka's court, and he says, I have many, many cows, like 100 cows, and with silver tips to finance them when they get old and when their milk dries up. And the wisest among you can take these. And Yajnavalkya says to his students, come on, take them, please. There's a big uproar. You say you're the wisest? Well, now it's not the mark of a wise person to say, I'm wise and I'm taking the cows. And he says, well, if you think I'm not wise, then you prove it. Puts the onus on them. Burden of proof is on you. That stimulates a number of questions. Now, the one question really has come from don't forget, in these days, there wasn't this, all rishis are males. This is a female rishi. We call it Vachanavi Gargi for short.
Gargi.
Yeah.
Oh, well educated. Yeah. Mm.
Yes. So she's asking two questions, two key questions. But the kind of essence of the question would be, can you say what is above heavens, above the earth, or beneath the earth, and embracing heaven and earth also, and also embracing the past, the present, the future, or whole of time, in other words? What is woven like warp and woof? Beautiful. Because you see, when we talk of, in modern language, time, space, it's the fabric of time and space is what we call, and that's the answer. It is space. Okay. But then the question is repeated. Okay. So now what's this thing that is woven like warp and woof? What is that? What is behind that or within that, surrounding that? Then he says it's Brahman. But what is that? He's actually calling it Yakshara, the imperishable. Now he's a whole discourse in case we don't get it. He says, it's neither coarse nor is it fine. It's not short, it's not long, That has no dimensions, in other words. It doesn't have any color. It's neither red like fire nor fluid like water, all the things we're familiar with. It's none of those. It's without shadow, without darkness, without air, without space, without attachment, without taste, without smell, without eyes. You get the idea. Without ears, he goes on. Without speech, without mind, without light, without breath, without mouth, without measure, having no within and no without, it devours nothing and no one devours it. Now you think, what on earth could something be that has none of these things? You can't even imagine it.
Mm.
Then he says, by the command of that imperishable, in other words, by the will,
Oh.
you see, by the command of that imperishable, O Gargi, sun and moon stand apart. By the command of that, heaven and earth stand apart. By the command of that, what are called moments, dimesha, moments in time, hours, muhurta, days and nights, half months, months, seasons, years, all stand apart. See, when he says, every time he says by the command, he's saying by the will. By the command, some rivers flow to the east from the mountains, others to the west or to the other quarter. By the command of that imperishable, or yes, men follow the givers, that is the elements, the illuminating factors that we misunderstand or misinterpret as devas. Follow the sacrifices and the mains, that is the ancestors. They follow the rites for the dead. So the whole thing is laid on the responsibility of that within which the warp of woof, the time-space continuum is there. A beautiful passage. And so it goes on. It goes on like that, but you can see this is what we mean by the will, the free will, which is there, because that divine is not compelled or conditioned to make these things happen. It's eternally free. Now, we cannot say in that sense free will, but it looks like free will. And so any argument about do we have free will or not becomes actually a silly argument, because what will you gain from it? We seem to have choice. That is why in the psychology of the Samkhyas, they put buddhi, the choosing factor. It chooses between this and that, it makes a discriminatory factor. On the cosmic level, it is this mahat, this buddhi, this hiranyagarbha, this brahma, you see. The difference is our so-called free will is limited, it's conditioned in a causal framework. So now, yesterday I think we talked a little bit about science. So in the quantum world, it is completely indeterministic, which means the only reason, the only way in which it becomes something that we can deal with in the world of dimensions and so on is through free will. We choose at that level, at the indeterministic level, we choose this or that. And it's equivalent to saying it is God's will, God's choice.
Thank you so much.
Because that's all made from thought. And this thought and the quantum world, it's the same material, according to what Swami Vivekananda has said in his kind of introduction to Raja Yoga. All right, we'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Swamiji.
Okay, all good.